Huzzah and well met, my crafting ninjas. I go with that this time because if you've made it this far, this should be the third video about the crafter and things we can do with it. Behind me, you'll see 5 plots that I've worked on, but only 3 different machines here. So we'll get right into it and start with, well, first I need to start with one thing that was brought to my attention by a viewer, JD Wetwork. And I did test this, and they were right. If you were to, say, have your system here making iron blocks, you were hoping to get an iron block out of this, just like that, and that's all happening normally until you end up with only this many iron ingots out of your farm. You log off the world and you log back in, and it will make a set of iron bars for you. It's not uh, it's not world breaking or anything of that nature, but it can be irritating when you log out of your world, like I said, and log back in, and suddenly you've got, you know, perhaps a pressure plate, something that can't be fixed back into its original form, and now you're stuck with it. And that can be a waste of resources. Though, if you're building crafters on this scale, you probably aren't hurt by a couple iron ingots disappearing, but it can be frustrating anyways. So just be aware of that. If your machines um, are partially loaded as you log out and log back into your world, you could end up with some surprise items. So thanks very much to JD Wetwork for that one. I hadn't noticed it myself, or perhaps I had noticed something was going wrong with my crafters, but they pointed out that it was the logging in and out of the world. And I think that's because when you log into the world, um, it builds the world and then it updates redstone. And of course, these observers are going to observe these updates just as the world is loading. So just be aware of that. That's why this circuit is kind of considered lowest tier, but it has its uses, as we've seen. This circuit I showed you in Crafter Basics or Crafter Basics 2. It's a much more stable version of the circuit, but it is bulkier, and it does not make those mistakes. So now you have that. This version of it I've just built rotated 90 degrees with a hopper output, because that's going to be important here in a moment. So let's get into this. This is a 2-item crafter, and I'm just going to preface this whole section of the video. All of these advanced, in big sarcastic quotation marks, crafting machines require you to pre-build the recipe in the crafter so that when you load up the hopper, or hoppers as it were, they will make the correct item, and instead you don't get uh, a jammed up crafting table and no items at all. So how is this one working? Well, what we have here is this yellow circuit, and if you watch my videos regularly, you know I like to keep my circuits color coded for the learning process. So we have a redstone dust being observed. Here, we'll come back here so you can see that a little better, but the observer is watching this dust. It sends a signal through the yellow block, which lights up this redstone, and whoops, I stifled a sneeze and accidentally broke my machine. So anyway, we'll go like this. Grab that, put that there with all the delay on it, and oh, we really broke it. We're gonna have to start over here for a second. Okay, now that'll fire once as we take everything out. There we go. All right, So we have the yellow circuit is just a basic clock with a repeater set to 4 ticks on top. That's so our items have time to get in and get in position into the crafter. This one, it can do up to 3 items. You can put another hopper on top. Just make sure that your items are balanced so that you don't have, for instance, like minecart rails that use 6 iron and 1 stick. You're going to run yourself out of iron and break your machine long before you use up your sticks. So, general balance, it will shut itself down so that it's not just blankly firing, but this is how it does that, is as long as there are items in these hoppers, these comparators behind these hoppers are going to power or supply power to these blocks, our blue and green concrete here, or light blue and light green, which will turn off these torches. So while these torches are off, this clock can cycle. Once the hopper is empty and the comparator is no longer sending a signal, it's going to take us too long to get to that point. You'll see the comparator will turn off, the torch will turn on, which powers this redstone dust, which means there's no update for our observer to see. So our cycle will stop, and it will stop firing the crafter, which means no more items coming out. But as soon as you put items back in, it fires right back up and keeps going. So as long as you don't run the crafter out of items at all, it will be fine. It will continue to run every time you load it up again. We can have it putting things directly into a chest. You can put your chests right here and load items into the hoppers that way. It doesn't bug the machine at all. Something you might want to consider is if you're perhaps with these sticks, for example, you'd want to have a module like this one or a circuit like this, and the output being sticks connected to this hopper. So you could be feeding in logs, or I'm sorry, wooden planks of any kind to be turned into sticks, and then the sticks fed into this machine. Which is going to lead into the next video I want to do, is more of a thought piece on the way I think about builds and the way I design factories and machines inside my worlds. Most of these small components I get from other videos, or I learn them along the way, or I pick up on them myself. That's more rare, but I try to give credit when I find these things. So the next video will be something of how I try to lock all these things together. But anyway, onward to this machine. And this is a 2-part crafter where the first part has to be processed down. So this is making paper out of sugar canes. This is our first hopper. And our second hopper is turning the paper and gunpowder into rockets. Admittedly, this has limited application. Off the top of my head, I can think of books, or maybe, like I said, sticks being turned into torches, or wooden planks being turned into sticks and then made into torches, something along those lines. But because rockets are so stinking important once you get your elytra, it's plenty enough useful that only being able to do a few different items, it's still a good machine to know or to have around. So here's our bottom layer. You're going to start with a crafter facing to the right, into a hopper, into the other crafter. And then your output can go whichever direction you want. You can technically even turn this one to the side. That works too. It just really depends on where you want your output. But anyways, we're going to have our yellow circuit back here, a comparator looking into that yellow block into our crafter, or powering our crafter rather, and then a hopper. These two hoppers back here are facing into each other. They're going to become an oscillating clock. I know there's an official name for it. I can't remember it. You have a hopper pointed at this comparator. This comparator is reading this hopper between the crafters. And then you have an observer looking at that hopper, an observer looking at that observer, powering our initial crafter. For the second layer, you're going to put comparators behind both of the hoppers on these crafters. These hoppers we start with these hoppers, comparators reading those hoppers. Separate circuits, even though they're doing a very similar thing, they're both individual. So they power this green block, which powers off the torch when it detects items inside the hopper. And this one will do the same. Once it detects sugar canes, in this case, it will power the blue block and power off the torch. Once that torch is powered off, that means this redstone is powered off, and we have one single item in these two hoppers so that it oscillates back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Every time it does, we have this comparator reading and firing the second crafter. Reading when there's an item in here, firing the second crafter. So we now have two separate clocks that are all kind of tied to the same redstone and locked up situation. So things to be concerned about with this. In this case, we're doing sugarcane. We want to preload our recipe. As I said at the preface of these advanced crafters, you want to preload your recipe, otherwise it's not going to work. This one might work. You could realistically do something like that and still get your same output. We can also do this and get ourselves flight duration 3 rockets, but that uses up your I picked that up and it did not go into my inventory, but that's okay. As long as there's a single item in this hopper, then our machine will function. And okay, preloaded recipe, at least one item in this hopper, and your preloaded recipe. It does not have to be a full stack to start with, but if you load up this hopper with gunpowder, then you absolutely will get full stacks loaded in there, but that's totally fine. So this will begin working, as you can see, once we throw some items into this hopper. Excuse me. We see this one is firing a little bit more slowly than the other, but we don't use as much paper, so this is staying just fine, even though that's firing a lot faster than this crafter is. So once again, be aware of the balance of your items coming in and your outputs, and it will be just fine. But we don't want that to just be making noise at us, so we're going to put a stop to that. Finally, we have a 3-item crafter that is smart enough to turn itself off when it has no items. So let's get into our bottom layer here, and we'll explain. This is doing a lot of the same things. We have our yellow circuit this time. We're going to have a torch on both sides of it. This will lock the hoppers to keep them from just spewing in too many items all at once. We have these two repeaters facing this way into our yellow block. It'll send a signal right through this gray one to the next repeater. It then goes that way. All of these are on 4 ticks of delay, and they will light up this redstone dust at the back when the signal comes around. We have 3 comparators looking this way. I'll explain more of what they are. They're just on this layer of our build. And then currently we have this one in subtract mode. When that red light is on, it's subtract mode, and we are sending it a signal to the side of 14. Now, I've said in my previous videos that in subtract mode, a comparator will get a signal from behind it, and it will take that signal from behind it minus the signal it gets from the side and print and send that signal onward. So if we're sending it 14, the only way this comparator sends a signal onward is if it gets a signal strength of 15. So let's step over here to the rest of our build. That means that for this comparator, same comparator in subtract mode, getting a signal strength of 14 from the side, this hopper needs to be 100% full for it to get enough signal to power this torch off. These comparators as well are seeing some items, so they are powered on, which means they power the torches off. But all three of these torches need to be powered off to take the power off from this circuit and allow our clock that we built in the last step to cycle. And round the signal will go, firing the crafter each time it comes to the yellow block. So you can turn that portion off. There's nothing in the hopper. Well, there's very little in the hopper. So if we do that, it's going to work. But there we have it. So we want to keep that like that for now because we're keeping things locked. And then once again, preset your recipe. We're building beacons here because we fought an army of withers, and now we're feeling pretty confident that we need beacons all over our world. So that's something you could do too. But this would work even for something like powered rails or detector rails. Anything that's 3 pieces, it is smart enough, or 3 unique ingredients to build. So you could use, or you could build, well, just about anything. And another thing that we can do as well, if you wanted to reset this machine, you could take and put switches on here so that they depower these torches, and you're only building with 1 item. If you're building with fewer items as well, you can also adjust the speed of this. But for the default settings, for complex recipes, use the all 4 repeaters on 4 ticks. And then finally, this comparator being in subtract mode is a failsafe because our recipe uses 5 pieces of glass for every 1 nether star and every 3 obsidian. So we'll put our ingredient here, or our unique item, in this side so that we have the the most numerous on the subtract mode comparator, so that we don't risk running out our recipe here. We make sure that this hopper is 100% full before it decides to start building again. And somehow I don't have enough glass in my inventory to make that happen, but load that up. You'll see it fired. It made 1, and then there wasn't enough glass in the hopper to sustain the signal anymore. It shut down the clock, and there you have it. So we can place a chest here. You'll see it turned off the torch. Spit out a couple of beacons for us. But it won't take it long before this was not going to be getting enough signal. If you want to do something with an unstackable item, put the unstackable item to the back here, because both of these hoppers are locked between cycles, so that, for instance, if you were going to make a dispenser and you needed the bow to get in the center slot each time, you would lock off the cobblestone hopper and the redstone hopper, and you would put the bows in the back because that's the one hopper that doesn't get locked up during cycles. And as you can see, we're no longer crafting. Our chest is empty. We have 6 missing bits of glass in there before our signal is enough to allow our system to go again. So this thing is very stable. It's very methodical. It's slow. It's easy to fix. It's actually not a very difficult circuit to understand once you break it down. You'll see I used blue here for this circuit, green here for this circuit, but these all come together and do the same job. The point of all of these is to turn the torches off, which allows the system to run. And once again, this will work for almost any recipe in this game that takes 3 items. You can also do it with a 2-item recipe and just, like I showed you, shut off one of the one of the torches manually with a switch, or excuse me, a lever technically. You can also completely take out the comparator, and that torch will be on to lock up the system. We don't necessarily want that at all times, but this way you can use one singular machine to do all of your complex crafting. All you have to do is manually reset which recipe and what is coming into these hoppers, which can be an issue if you were, say, using this on the output end of an iron farm or a single item farm of some kind. It might not be able to handle output like that, which is where some of our more basic ones come into play. But this is going to be helpful, to have at your base that you want to build a lot of something. The example I saw was with end crystals, and I don't know why you would need billions of end crystals, but if you can, go for it. And with that, that's really all I have on crafters anymore. Like I said at the beginning, I'm hoping this is the last video on crafters. Anything more complex than this is going to be very situational to your world, and I don't think I could make you a generic factory that would solve your problems. You would have to use some of these components for yourself to solve your own unique issues to your world. So, but do feel free to reach out for help if you'd like. I'm generally reachable at my email address, and I respond to most of my comments, um, especially if they're questions. So once again, thank you all for the views. Thank you all for the subscriptions. Like, I'm going to quit saying numbers because by the time this video goes out, the number will be wrong. I'm getting subscribers that quickly. So once again, can't say thank you enough for that. I very much appreciate you all. I appreciate the positive comments you leave. Um, Feel free to help each other out as well. If you find cool builds and stuff, share them with me. I like those too. I have plenty more farms to come, but my next video, like I said, is going to be about modularity and how you put your things together, and I might even record that one yet tonight. So, I am your White Sun Paladin, signing off. I hope you're blessed on your next quest, and I'm off to my next adventure, which I think is some dinner. This time, anyways. And then we'll see. Then we will see. So, good night.